Today I'll be speaking about arguably the most well-known member of American organized crime, which would be Anthony Fat Tony Salerno. When it comes to history, facts, for the most part, become convoluted. Anthony Salerno was either born on the 11th or 15th of August, 1911. Nevertheless, in April 1947, after producing his driver's license to the police, it stated that his birthday was August 11th, 1911, and he was either born in the Bronx or in East Harlem, New York. But he was without a doubt raised in East Harlem and was one of 7 children of Alfred and Maria Mary Salerno. One of the interesting things, and hardly uncommon for that era, is that there are no indications that Salerno held a legitimate job while growing up, with the exception of a statement from one of his many business partners who said Salerno was once a truck driver's helper. In those days, the children of Italian immigrants, for the most part, grew up in the street. And in Salerno's case, his family came from Messina, Sicily. His early arrest record is minimal, and the fact that he used aliases, such as Anthony Russo, may have played a role. His first arrest took place in 1936 for policymaking, which is similar to the numbers racket. On April 24, 1945, he was arrested in Rhode Island for suspicion. And on April 3rd, 1947, he was taken into custody in Miami, Florida, and arrested for vagrancy. The only act of violence was by suspicion in the murder of Joseph Bonilla, who was a rival numbers banker from the Upper West Side and killed on February 28, 1954. Salerno was married on July 15, 1935, but divorced in September 1946 in Miami, and that marriage produced a daughter. He remarried again in 1947, although there's no records of the marriage. At a young age, he became associated to the 116th Street crew, which can be traced back to the days of Giuseppe Morello, where they were known as the 116th Street Mob. Salerno fell under the guidance of Michael Coppola, who may or may not have been his cousin. Coppola essentially ran the old Luciano family, who was led by Charles Lucky Luciano. Luciano was convicted of prostitution and sentenced to decades in prison and eventually deported to Italy. As Coppola's protege, Salerno learned the ways in which the mob made money, which included extortion, gambling, loan sharking, etc. A strange fact is, Salerno, unlike most Harlem guys, disliked narcotics, and Coppola and his crew were known to be heavily involved in the drug business. From the onset, Salerno became the subject of conversation between numerous informants and the FBI. The informants numbered exceeded to at least 25. During the early 1950s, Coppola relocated to Miami, Florida due to legal troubles, which included suspicion of a murder that took place in 1946. As a result, Salerno was made acting captain of the 116th Street crew. It's more than likely he had already been inducted by the mid to late 1930s. And although Coppola was in Miami, Salerno would visit him at least 4 times a year. On one occasion, they met in the Carib Hotel in Miami with Tony Ducks Corallo and others. Salerno's primary residence was on the 7th floor at 850 7th Avenue in Manhattan. He also had 2 places in Miami Beach, an apartment at 11 Isle Avenue, and the house at 1041 North Venetian Drive. He also purchased a 100-acre farm in Rhinebeck, New York, and spent a great deal of time at the farm, which included horse stables and a horse riding rink. He even bought his daughter a pony and signed her up for riding lessons. Salerno and his friends would practice target shooting on the property as well. And because the FBI learned this fact, they always considered him armed and dangerous. Whenever Salerno came to East Harlem, before he even got out of the car, guys would clear the streets of addicts and junk pushers first. Salerno was often chauffeured around in either a green station wagon or numerous other cars. He was known to hand out generous tips to people he encountered. The FBI profiled him as someone who controlled the numbers racket in East Harlem and considered him to be the richest man in the business. Despite that he and his crew operated out of East Harlem, mainly from Salerno's Palmer Boys Social Club, their rackets expanded to most of the 5 boroughs, and over time would expand throughout the United States. According to FBI reports, his inner circle included Joseph Rayo, Alexander Rosado, Joseph Tortorici, Alfred Coppola, and his cousin, Joseph Strachey. Coppola, nicknamed Sharky, handled the numbers racket for Salerno, and for years, the FBI only knew him as Sharky from their informants. During a conversation with an informant, Salerno admitted to making $30,000 a day. The numbers racket brought in millions and millions of dollars. And besides the number spots he owned, Salerno taxed other spots up to 65% just to operate in New York. Besides the number racket, Salerno was loan sharking large amounts of money. His crew was involved in extortion, gambling, which included floating dice games, card rooms, and horse rooms. He also owned several legitimate businesses, such as the Metro Urban Music Company, located on First Avenue in Manhattan, which serviced and repaired vending machines and jukeboxes. He was involved in private carding, a dress company in Poughkeepsie, New York, parking lots around the city, as well as numerous bars like the Playroom Bar on 130 West 58th Street between 6th and 7th Avenues. According to an informant, Salerno dated a prostitute from the bar and got her an apartment in his building on 7th Avenue. He also had his hand in many of the unions operating in and around New York. Years later, he had a piece of S&A Concrete during the Concrete Club days. An August 26, 1959, New York Post article named Salerno as Mr. X of the boxing world. The article described Salerno as an East Harlem racketeer who, behind the scenes, promoted the Patterson and Johannesson heavyweight title fight. Allegedly, Salerno put up $25,000 to promote the fight. The FBI was advised by an informant that Salerno bet heavily on Patterson during the rematch fight with Johannesson, in which Patterson won. Another informant notified the FBI that for years Salerno was meeting each morning around 2 a.m. with Vincent Allo, a Genovese captain, and Tommy Lucchese, boss of the Lucchese family. At the time, Allo controlled the big bookmaking operation in Florida and was closely aligned with Coppola. Tommy Lucchese had control over the garment center in New York, and Salerno was involved in the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. The family's namesake, Vito Genovese, remained the boss from 1957 up until his death in prison in 1969. His acting boss, Philip Benny Squint Lombardo, became the official boss and held the position until 1981. During his time as boss, he implemented a street boss or front boss position. And from 1975, Frank Ponzitieri held that position up until 1980. Salerno had a good reputation in the gambling world. When one number was played heavily and was hit for over $400,000, every person that hit was paid. As far as the FBI was concerned, Salerno was deemed the top hoodlum. They kept constant surveillance on his homes in Miami and New York, as well as all his known hangouts, but were unable to ID him despite their attempts to surveil him for years. At one point, the FBI learned that Salerno had his 7th Avenue residence packed up and his belongings were placed into storage. By this time, according to informants, Salerno was making about $6 million a year, a number that the FBI claimed rose to $50 million. In September 1961, an informant notified the FBI that Salerno was kidnapped while in Florida and was being held for a $35,000 ransom. This most likely was disinformation put out by Salerno because 2 months earlier, he was subpoenaed to appear before a Senate subcommittee. In addition, the ransom was extremely low for someone worth millions of dollars. The FBI finally located Salerno on September 22, 1961, at his Miami house. He briefly told the agents that he heard a rumor that he was dead and it upset him. He claims he was on a fishing trip, and that's all he wanted to say. The agents noticed a new Mercedes parked in his neighbor's driveway. It turns out the car belonged to Salerno. He just didn't want to park it outside his house. Throughout the 1960s, the FBI continued to receive information via their informants on Salerno, what he was up to, who he was meeting with. For example, it was reported he met with Rhode Island boss Raymond Patriarca. They also learned the places Salerno visited when he was in Florida and that he purchased a boat and was making trips to the Florida Keys and the Bimini Islands. Also, the numerous cars that were being used to drive him around, and that Salerno gave $10 million to open a gambling operation in a hotel in Kingston, Jamaica, and that he was a member of a Florida yacht club where Jimmy Hoffa was also a member. Despite all the information collected on Salerno, which included with him meeting with high-level people in organized crime all over the United States, as the 1960s came to an end, I believe the drug era during the 1970s, especially in Harlem, overshadowed gambling. Nonetheless, by 1975, the Genovese family made Salerno the underboss, and 2 years later, the FBI was finally able to hit him with several indictments. On May 3rd, 1977, Salerno was indicted for gambling regarding $10 million that they say he earned annually. At the time, it was reported that he employed up to 400 people to run his operation. He was also indicted for tax evasion for failing to report income from 1971 to 1975. He hired high-profile lawyer Roy Cohn, who was able to work out a deal for him. Cohn told the judge that his client was not a gangster, but rather a compulsive gambler with a variety of health issues. So Salerno pled guilty to 1 count of using a telephone to conduct illegal gambling and 2 counts of failing to report income in exchange for a 6-month sentence. Please remember to hit the like icon if you haven't already. If anyone wants to show their appreciation for this video, you know what to do, and thank you. In 1981, Vincent Gigante became the official boss of the Genovese family and placed Salerno in the front boss position, a move that fooled most of the mob and the FBI as well. On February 25, 1985, Salerno and 8 others were indicted in the commission case. He was also indicted on March 20, 1986, along with others in a 29-count racketeering indictment. Salerno ultimately would be convicted in the commission case on November 19, 1986, and sentenced on January 13, 1987 to 100 years. Anthony Salerno died while at the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri on July 27, 1992.